Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. In this lesson, I want to show you how to build a super simple Visual Basic application, a Hello World application. It'll simply display the message Hello World in a console window on your computer. Now, I'm not going to attempt to even explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. The focus will purely be on what and how I'm doing it. In other words, I want you to focus on the workflow at this first pass. How to create a new project. Where do you type your Visual Basic code? How do you test your application and actually see it running as you're building the application? What do you do if you actually mistype code? How do you fix the problems that pop up? And how do you save your project to disk and things like that? And so for now, just try to follow along and do exactly what I'm doing. Don't worry if something doesn't really make sense just yet. That's really what the rest of this course is for. We'll get to it. I promise we'll explain everything. In the next few lessons, we're going to dissect this tiny little application that we're going to build here, and I'll explain at that point why we did what we did, the purpose behind everything. Again, like I said in the introduction to this course, I'm going to assume that you have some version and edition of Visual Studio already installed. Even if your Visual Studio looks a little bit different than what you see on my screen, that's okay. The basics are the basics no matter what. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to go to the File menu and select File, New Project. That'll pop open the New Project dialog. And this is important. If you get lost on this step, you're going to be lost, significantly lost. So take a moment and really pay attention to what you're doing here. Make sure you're in the installed templates here on the left-hand side. You're going to see a number of languages and tools over here now beneath the word templates. You must make sure that you have selected Visual Basic. If not, you're going to wind up with a weird template and you're not going to know what to do next. I've gotten enough comments through the years to know that this is a frequent mistake that people make. So make sure that you select Visual Basic, and then you'll see a list of template types. And we'll talk about what templates are a little bit later in this course, but for now we just want to make sure to select Console Application. We're going to use the console application template pretty much exclusively throughout this entire course until we get to the very end. And so you'll always want to make sure to choose console application. The next thing we're going to do is give our new application a name. Now, when we change the name, there will be some changes to the solution name here below it. And so I'm going to type in the word hello, capital H, hello, capital W, world. Notice that I didn't put any spaces between the words hello and world, okay? And then you'll see that that same word is typed here. I'll show you what that means a little bit later on. By default, it's going to put your new projects into your documents folder. And so for me, my user on this computer is Bob, and Bob has a documents folder. You're probably familiar with that. And inside of there will be a Visual Studio folder with the year, or rather the version of Visual Studio that you're currently using. In my case, 2015. It could be 2050. I don't know. Whatever, whenever you're watching this course. And then finally, there's a subfolder called Projects, and that's where we want to start off by saving all of our projects. You could change this and put this someplace else, but if you keep it here, then you always know where to find your projects. Now, if there's any other selections to be made here, and it might depend based on which edition and version of Visual Studio that you're actually using, just make sure that if there's an option to create a directory for the solution, make sure that that is turned on, but everything else can be turned off. You can ignore every other little message that pops up. We'll click the OK button to create our new project. Visual Studio goes off and does some work for a moment or two. And ideally, you have this little window in the upper right-hand corner called the Solution Explorer visible. This is going to show you all the files and things that are associated with the project. We'll come back and talk about that later. Here in the main area, you'll see a tabbed area called module1.vb, hopefully opened up. And inside here, we're going to make some room for ourselves. We're going to put the little caret there on line 4. I'll hit the enter key on the keyboard a couple of times just to make some space for what comes next. We're going to type in some code. And I'm going to type in the word console because I want to work with a console window. And I'm going to hit the period key on the keyboard, and I want to write a line of information to the screen. So I'm going to use this write line method. We'll talk about methods in just a little while. Write line, and I'm going to give it the message that I want to be typed in. So I'm going to use double quotation marks, and I'm going to type the word hello space world. Whatever I type inside of these two double quotes, this will actually be displayed to screen. We'll come back to that in just a moment. And then I want to make sure to write one more line of code, console dot, and you'll see little windows pop up with information and messages. It can be distracting at first, but actually this all comes together and it becomes one of the most useful features of Visual Studio. So ignore it for now. We'll pay attention to what it is a little bit later. Just type all the way through what I'm telling you to type right now. Read line. And then we're going to use an opening and closing parentheses, but nothing inside of it this time. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is save our work. And I'm going to hit the little icon on the toolbar, save all. It has two little disks next to each other. And you'll see the little yellow line here turns into a green line, letting us know that everything's been saved. And then you should be able to find a little green arrow with the word start next to it here on your toolbar. Now, sometimes you may not see these based on some of the default settings, or you may have accidentally moved some things around. Just about everything you see on the toolbar can also be found in the menus. So, for example, in the File menu, there's a Save All option, and then in the Debug menu, there's a Start Debugging. So, if there's something that you don't see on your toolbar that you see on mine, just look through the menus and you might find it there. But ideally, it would be here on your toolbar. I'm going to click the Start button. And you'll notice that the appearance of Visual Studio changes a little bit, and then off to the side, a console window pops up with the word Hello World with a blinking cursor. Awesome. All right, so we built our first application. How do we stop the application? There's two ways. I could click the little X button here in the upper right-hand corner, or I can hit the Enter key on the keyboard. The application will stop executing, and now we're back into edit mode in Visual Studio, back here in the code where we could modify it and make changes. So you can see that Visual Studio is now returned to its original state, and you might see some other windows pop open from time to time. You can safely ignore those for now. Now, what if your experience was vastly different from my experience? So, for example, what if you type the code out, but you see an error message pop up when you actually attempted to run the application or start the application? You get this little error message that says there were build errors. Would you like to continue and run the last successful build? Select no. And then what you should see is a list of errors pop up. A list of errors here in a little window called the error list. And in this particular case, you can see that I get a little notification of the issues. And if I were to click on one of them, it would take me to the line of code where that error was actually manifested. Now, the error list popped away, but if I hover or click on the error list here in the bottom, it will pop back up for me. So it goes away, it pops up. All right, so you can feel comfortable with moving around Visual Studio to that extent. Also, if I hover my mouse cursor over this little red squiggly line, it will say that there is a declaration expected. Now, the reason for this particular error is because you wrote the code in the wrong place. You may have placed it between the module and end module keywords, but not between the sub and sub. Again, ideally, this code belongs right here between the sub main and the end sub. You need to put it right there in the middle. And so that's probably one of the first and most important messages, is that it matters where you type your code. And I'll explain what a sub is versus a module. There are other kinds of code blocks, as we'll come to understand as we continue through this series. But that's one potential error that you could have run into. You saw how Visual Studio tries to tell us that there's a problem with the red squiggly line. It also gave us a list of errors. Now, once we fix those errors, notice that the error list is clean. So you can see also that it tells us that there's 0 errors with our code. Awesome. All right, so maybe you had a different problem. Maybe you see an error that looks something like this, and you get a red line completely underneath it. You try to run the application, you get that same little "there were build errors" message in a message box. You click the no button, and you see something like readine notice there's no L in readline, is not a member of console. Now, admittedly, since we don't know Visual Basic very well at this point, the messages are not as helpful. But the fact that the error is happening on this line means that we can take a moment and really try to investigate what the problem is. And in this case, if you really look at it carefully, you'll notice that I'm missing the L in readline. So precision is extremely important as you're typing code. You have to type exactly what I type in order to get the results that I get. So even if you deviate by one little character, it can unfortunately stop the execution and the compilation of your code. So in this case, we just have to add the L in readline and we're good to go again. You could experience something similar, if we misspell the word console. In this case, you'll see that console is not declared. It might be inaccessible due to protection level. Now here again, the problem is we misspelled the word console, but once we fix it, then the error will go away and we can run our application again. All right. Or perhaps you didn't use you didn't use double quotation marks and you see that hello world has no double quotation marks around it and you get two different error messages whenever you attempt to run the application. One says something about a comma. The other one says hello is not declared. It might be inaccessible. Again, since we're not as familiar with Visual Basic at this point, the messages might throw us for a little bit of a confusing loop. But the remedy is easy. Again, precision is important. We have to surround that message, in this case, with double quotation marks. And I'll explain why in an upcoming lesson, what that really is telling Visual Basic, the Visual Basic compiler. All right, but that's how we would fix that issue. So again, I think that making sure that you follow my instructions carefully, making sure you type the code where I type it, not outside of one of the code areas like I've designated, like I've tried to call your attention to, but rather in the right spot, and then making sure you spell everything correctly. That is the key to moving forward. Whenever you run into issues, it's probably not Visual Basic or you have a problem with Visual Studio. Some people will say, is my version of Visual Studio different than yours because I typed this out and it won't run for me? And invariably what happens is they've done something incorrectly when they typed in the code. So typing in code is an exercise in precision. You've got to make sure that it's exactly what you see on your screen and what you see on my screen is identical. Okay? All right. So assuming you got this to work, then you're well on your way to building applications. You've already learned some of the most important lessons so far, whether you realize it or not. As you undoubtedly learned in this lesson, writing Visual Basic code is an exercise in preciseness. However, frankly, Visual Basic is probably the most forgiving of programming languages because it will always nudge you in the right direction, at least as often as it can. Or at the very least, it's going to show you where the problem was by putting a little red squiggly line or something along those lines, giving you errors in the error list that you can work from. So in the following lessons, we're going to begin focusing on two things primarily. First of all, why we did what we did here. What happens whenever we create a new project? What happens when we click the Save All button? What happens whenever we click that Start button to actually run our application? So that's number one. Number two, we're going to focus on the syntax of the Visual Basic code that we wrote. So if preciseness is required, then you're going to need to have some explanation as to what all the words and the symbols that we've been using here, the use of the period, the use of the opening and closing parentheses, the use of the double quotation marks. What do all these mean? And honestly, it's really easy once you get started. Once you get a few basics under your belt, I think you're going to see that writing Visual Basic is almost as easy as writing English into Microsoft Word. Okay, so at any rate, we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.